All right, you're all set.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the South Orange Public Library Lecture Series Special Conversations. I'm Laura Sims, the moderator for the series, and I'm so pleased to have Professor John Wargacki with us. He is an English professor at Seton Hall and an author, and he is going to help us celebrate National Poetry Month today, April. And there's no better person to do it. So John teaches American literature and poetry in the Department of English at Seton Hall University here in South Orange. His scholarly interests focus on poetry and spirituality. So perfect conversation for today, American poetry and the spirit. He's published on Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson, Hart Crane, Wallace Stevens, and Robert Frost. You may have heard of some of those people. His forthcoming book is titled One Bridge of Fire, which I love that title. The Rhetoric of Belief in Dickinson, Whitman, Hart Crane, Stevens, and Eliot. Among his other teaching and scholarly interests are religion and spiritual intersections with literature and the American horror genre, which I'm a big fan of. John has been a frequent and favorite guest of Special Conversations. He was just here last October to talk about the phantoms of poetry and prose for Halloween. And he's been coming since 2004. He's talked about love poems, patriotic poems, and much more. So I'm so excited to hear what he has to say today about American poetry and the spirit. Please join me in welcoming Professor John Wargacki. Take it away, John.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Always such a warm and incredibly kind, welcoming introduction. I always feel like South Orange Public Library is like an extension of my building, Bay Hall at Seton Hall. It's another part of what we do. So it's such a pleasure to be here. Now, we do have a pretty packed agenda, and some poems are a little bit longer than others. So we're going to dive right in. And as I had mentioned, I pitched the talk a little bit. Welcome, Tanya. We are talking about poetry and the spirit, and a number of ways. We're mindful, of course, like a couple of my Muslim students are reminding me that they're right in the middle of Ramadan right now, and some are saying, one class I have broaches over into the evening, and one of my students mentioned on Monday, I hope it's okay to eat at sundown. I said, yes, by all means. And of course, next week, as a dear old friend of mine from Israel used to say, she used to love it when Passover and Easter kind of fell around the same time, and Passover falls on Good Friday next week. The sundown is the beginning of Passover. So my friend Shula from Israel used to say, our traditions are holding hands. And I used to think that was such a charming phrase. So with all of that said, we're not going to be talking about any one tradition, but we're going to talk about something that really is the subject of my book, which is how our poets reflect attitudes of belief from wherever the time they're living in, the perspective they're coming from, and things of that sort. So let's get to who I often describe as, if you will, and I don't think this term is out of vogue yet, the father of American poetry. We so often have done entire programs on the mother of American poetry, to be Emily Dickinson. They never met each other, but they've unwittingly become the poets we turn to see what about American poetry is unique in terms of form and style. And the father, of course, one of the progenitors of our American tradition is the great Walt Whitman, who has a lot to say about spirituality, coming out of a transcendentalist background, and really being, in some ways, if you ever read a very powerful essay by Ralph Waldo Emerson called The Poet. He doesn't have a specific poet in mind. He knows that he himself will not be this poet, but he imagines a poet who is going to, as he says, set the American experience to meters. And that it's going to be somebody. He imagines this almost mythic figure. And certainly within a number of years, Whitman, who will have read that essay, is already sort of moving in that direction. He's going to seize upon some of those ideas in Emerson's The Poet, and we're going to see them come to life in Leaves of Grass. And Leaves of Grass, of course, is the one big book he writes over a period. First edition was deliberately published on July the 4th, what a surprise, 1855, sort of positing itself to be the poem of America. And then he'll go through 9 editions over the course of his lifetime until the deathbed edition of 1891-92. And so we have 9 editions. And this is something from one of the earlier parts. It wasn't the first, but it was one of the earlier parts. And it became, as I like to describe it, Song of Myself, 52 sections, which serves, if you're interested in musical theater, it's like the overture to all of Leaves of Grass, all of the major themes, all of the images, all of the ideas, all of those little snippets of the songs we're going to hear really in full view in the poem. We're going to read in full view in the poem, like you would in the overture before the musical starts, are introduced to us. And one of them is, of course, the way Whitman feels about God. And he takes quite, I think this is a good way of thinking about it, because if we can read our first poem today in a way that seems to posit the human being, ourselves as being divine. And Whitman would say, yes, of course, without any kind of encroachment upon anybody, anything would be offensive to anybody who'd find that, well, how could a human being be divine? Whitman is thinking in some ways, although he doesn't say it here, of the way we have the Namaste in Hinduism that says, I acknowledge that which is divine within you. So if Keisha, if we can call up the first poem from one of the later sections of Song of Myself, I think this would be a really wonderful way to get started. There is a section just before this where he specifically acknowledges and addresses an entire litany of traditions that span Eastern mysticism, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam. But I went to this section instead because it's a little bit more, it's less specific and more open-ended about God and the Spirit. So I'm wondering perhaps if somebody could get us started, if somebody wouldn't mind reading, maybe just the first part of the poem, from verse 48, from I have said that the soul up to a million universes. Yes, that part right there.
I'll do it if no one else wants to do it.
Well, Myra, it seems like you're the one. You'll take care of it.
Did you say Laura or?
Oh, Myra.
Okay.
Yeah, Laura,
okay.
we're going to definitely call on you.
I'm so eager.
I have said that the soul is not more than the body, and I have said that the body is not more than the soul, and nothing, not God, is greater to one's self is, and whoever walks a furlong without sympathy walks to his own funeral dressed in his shroud. And I or you, pocketless of a dime, may purchase the pick of the earth, and to glance with an eye or show a bean in its pod confounds the learning of all times. And there is no trade or employment, but the young man following it may become a hero. And there is no object so soft, but it makes a hub for the wheeled universe. And I say to any man or woman, let your soul stand cool and composed before a million universes.
Thank you, Myra. Well, we notice a couple of things immediately. Whitman writes in a very conversational way. He's mindful of the fact that when he is sharing poetry in his blank verse in Song of Myself and throughout Leaves of Grass, that he doesn't want anyone who can read poetry, and it was a good segment of our population that is really illiterate. They haven't been schooled, they haven't read, they can pick up a few things, but he wants anybody who can read to understand what he's reading, and anyone who can hear hear what he's reading or hear what he wrote being read to understand it as well. So while some of the ideas may seem a little bit heavy, his vocabulary and his language, especially for the middle to latter 19th century, is very accessible. And some of it makes us think, but it's all within that transcendentalist vein. For a long time, it seemed as though we always privileged the things of the spirit over the things of the physical, right? That entire relationship between the metaphysical and things that we sometimes in some traditions think of as the separation between the sacred and the profane, or the sacred and the the ordinary. But Whitman is telling us from the beginning, I have said that the soul is not more than the body, and I have said that the body is not more than the soul. He sees them in equal measure. He values one as much as the other because he feels that the body is a sacred place. And we also notice that he has a very compelling line here that is also quite consistent with a transcendentalist thought. And nothing, not God, is greater to one than one's self is, which is very interesting because, again, although some folks, especially in his time, might say, "Oh my goodness, what is Walt trying to tell us here?" Walt would say, it goes back to when I was a little kid, and I remember being in Catholic school. We'd hear that that the two great commandments that Jesus taught, you shall love the Lord your God, which is really quoting the Hebrew Bible. Frankly, that's all there. It's all there in the Talmud, and it's also there in Leviticus. But you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And I remember a priest did a really interesting job of saying, there's really 3 commandments there. The last one is to love yourself, and that they all go together. It's not just love God, love your neighbor, but love your neighbor as you love yourself. So it presumes that you acknowledge your value, you acknowledge the importance of yourself, and that all that goes together with the greatness of God. And then we also notice throughout here that Whitman, he's one of the first poets. Now, I don't have the data to say with certainty he is the first or the first great writer, but it's not uncommon for Walt throughout Leaves of Grass to use the both pronouns, as we sometimes hear today, right? Him and her. And here he'll do that as well at the end. And I say to any man or woman, he's always mindful to include both genders, especially in the 19th century. Let your soul stand cool and composed before a million universes. Your soul is on. Do not be overwhelmed by this. You are part of something great, but you are an important part of it. It also seems to me that John, if you know the John Lennon's great song from Let It Be, Across the Universe, where he references like a million suns across the universe, it seems to be in line with what Whitman is saying here. So then he talks about how we should approach God, this idea of God. And he makes some very audacious, yet interesting statements as well. So Laura, would you like to take us from what comes next, maybe to the end of this verse? Because I don't think there's too much more left.
Okay, sure. And I say to mankind, be not curious about God, for I who am curious about each am not curious about God. No array of terms can say how much I am at peace about God and about death. I hear and behold God in every object, yet understand God not in the least, nor do I understand who there can be more wonderful than myself. Why should I wish to see God better than this day? I see something of God each hour of the 24, and each moment then. In the faces of men and women I see God, and in my own face in the glass. I find letters from God dropped in the street, and every one is signed by God's name. And I leave them where they are, for I know that wheresoe'er I go, others will punctually come forever and ever.
Wow. Thank you so much. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful to hear that read aloud, Myra and Laura. So I would like to, before I comment on it, I have a couple of things to say that stand out, but I'd like to know if anything stands out for you in particular, any line or any section or Anything that Whitman seems to be suggesting here that gets one's attention? I'm sure there's a lot, but anything that you would like to share with us?
I love when he says, nor do I understand who there can be more wonderful than myself. That's a pretty bold statement for the 19th century. And anytime, really.
Yes. And actually that is something I have highlighted to talk about in a moment. So I'm so glad you put a pin in it for the moment. That is pretty cool indeed. It's very, very audacious on one hand. Anybody else? Thank you, Laura. Tanya, we can't hear you. So yes.
Now, it doesn't seem very, of course, Christian. It seems kind of pagan in a nice way, you know.
Okay, I like that. Yeah.
If God is everything, then that's, you know, like pantheism or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that informed transcendentalist thinking, and it's important to understand that transcendentalism was not a religion, it was not a cult, it was a group of intellectuals who are really playing with a number of different ideas. And when you have a transcendentalist tradition in America, where on one hand, we consider the father of that tradition in America to be Ralph Waldo Emerson, and his most well-known protege to be Henry David Thoreau, and we read their writing, they are like two completely different people. Emerson is always bouncing around ethereal and philosophical ideas and wondering about the mystery of everything. And Thoreau, on the other hand, can appear to be rather cranky and talking about going to Walden, he raises a lot of questions writing about Walden, and even in Civil Disobedience, about how do we manage this very complex society with these very ethereal ideas. But I love those comments, and I would suggest the following. So one of the things the Transcendentalists are drawing upon is the Eastern mystic tradition from all across. They have been looking at texts from Hinduism. They're very interested in Buddhism, and are enfolding that in some ways into a Western sensibility, which for many people in the 19th century is a very new ballgame altogether. The other thing I would say, as far as that, not being, particularly seeming to come from our Western tradition, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, is Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. He's famous for a couple of mottos. And one of his most famous was that every soul's mission on earth, no matter what your tradition, is to find God in all things. To find God in all things. And I'm pretty sure that I don't think Walt was aware of that when he wrote this, but I think that's what he's up to here, that we look for God in everything. And then he asks at the end, why should I wish to see God better than this day? I see something of God each hour of the 24 and each moment. I think somebody had commented in the chat about the letters, right? The metaphor of letters being dropped on the streets. Is it? Yes, that he sees almost as though letters from God are falling all around us. Whether you want to consider it rays of sunshine or drops of rain, they're dropped in the street, and everyone is signed by God's name. So I want to go back to what Laura said before we go to our next poem, mindful of the time once more. We do have a couple more to do, and that is, it's a very interesting line. When we read it today, it could appear, and I often say this, Walt would have no problem, when Walt was, when we read Walt Whitman as a massive egotist, and the way we want to think about that word today, Walt would say, yes, absolutely. But then he would quickly add, but we all are. We all are in the best sense of the word, in that, as he says at the very beginning in stanza 1, I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom, atom, belonging to me as good belongs to you, which is Walt's way of saying that I'm singing the song of myself, but I'm doing it so that you will all sing the song of yourselves. You all are as beautiful and as wonderful. So to focus on that line for a second, I do this with my students sometimes. I say, I separate the word wonderful from wonder and think about it in isolation and change that phrase a little bit. Now, nor do I understand who there can be more that it not just wonderful than myself, but who I wonder about more or am filled with wonder is another way of seeing the same line. That one can be just in awe of the magnificence of the human experience as much as the divinity, which is we credit for creating it. It's very similar to the line in Hamlet, we're in Act 2, where he says, what a piece of work is a man, and goes on to revel about, our eyes, our faculties, our movements in apprehension like an angel, like a god. That's what Walt is really suggesting here, that, that we should all be mindful of how wonderful we are, because that is that sense of being created in God's image also. So I think this is a nice place to begin in discussions about the spirit. It makes us, it kind of takes us out of our comfort zone, if you will, or it takes us out of a particular religious tradition experience. And there's so much more where that came from with Walt, by the way. He never tires of discussing his subject. But let's take a look at the next poem and see where that brings us next. Yes. Yes. The wonderful Mary Oliver, who passed away not that long ago. So this is one of my favorite poems by her, and I think she's very influenced, I think, both by Emily Dickinson and Walt Whitman, and she's one of our great nature poems. And I'd ask if somebody would like to read Wild Geese by Mary Oliver for us today. Tanya, please.
Would love to. Wild geese, you do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles to the desert repenting. Only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I'll tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting. And it has to be moved up a smidge. Thank you. Over and over announcing your place in the family of things.
Wonderful. I'll start with this. Any just general impressions of this short poem by Mary Oliver? She has a lot going on here. You can almost see this as almost 3 separate stanzas, but we're not going to dissect it or explicate it like a poetry class. We're just going to have some fun with it today.
It's about connection.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I love how accepting it is too. And that wonderful first line, you do not have to be good. It's just very welcoming.
Yes. It reminds us that we don't have to be perfect. And in some ways, her first 3 lines, I wouldn't quite say she's disrespecting religious tradition, but she's reminding us that, the rituals we sometimes, or the way we sometimes can be down on ourselves, are not really edifying, nor do they help us to be all we can be. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for hundreds of miles through the desert repenting. It's a very dramatic metaphor, right? To literally be on your knees. It's hard enough to walk through the desert on your knees repenting. And then she changes that. She shifts that slightly to what we should be doing instead. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. And I love that phrase, the soft animal of your body. It's very reminiscent in some ways. There's a little connection here between that and the way Walt starts his poem about the body and the spirit, or the body and the soul, right? Emphasizing the importance of the body and how we are filled with emotions, and that part of the human experience is to share even our despair with one another. And it's always situated within a natural sort of landscape, from the sunrise to the sun, to the clear pebbles of the rain, to the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. And then she finally comes back around to the title, The Wild Geese, and how the wild geese are there in a way to remind us of what really matters. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, and sometimes we do feel lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, that in all of nature, there is some direction about what we should be thinking about and focusing on, and frankly, what direction we should be heading in. Harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. Just a marvelous phrase at the end. It's so simple, but to think of the soft animal of our body and announcing one's place in the family of things, it's almost like coming home. And the word that's absent but somehow runs through this entire poem is being at home with ourselves, and finding that place. Any other thoughts before we move to something else? Anything else that touched you? I think this is a poem that is emblematic, if you will, of so much of the way Mary Oliver invites us to new places through her verse.
I always,
Sorry.
no, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I always love the soft animal of your body, and then how the wild geese are harsh, because humans are so soft and so vulnerable compared to animals in a way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. Excellent point. And the geese, as we know, when they're doing their call far above our heads, it gets our attention, right? We hear those geese, and it can be a little bit shrill, but wonderful point. Tanya, you had an idea?
I just wanted to say, I heard Mary Oliver in a podcast once, and she talked about how she writes her poetry walking around in the woods and by the shore. And so she's being inspired as she in nature, as she writes a poem. It's right out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, there's a kinship there with Walt. Walt was always on the move. Always on the move. He was always moving. He was always traveling. He was always visiting. He always documents where he's going, what places he's been to. And in that experience of constantly moving through space, especially in the United States at the time, and similarly, Mary walking through forests, walking along shore fronts, seeing the ocean. She has a wonderful poem about being among the trees. Nature is constantly informing her verse, and then it connects with us on that level. So excellent. So we go to see what's next, which is in the same theme, but something completely different. Oh, wow. Okay, this is exciting now. Wonderful poem. I have an idea. We're going to let the poet read the poem for us and see how it sounds from Lucille Clifton, again, who was with us until fairly recently. She passed away a few years ago, maybe more than a few years at this point. Marvelous poet. And like Bell Hooks, except for her name, she prefers lowercase in all of her poetry. She's not fond of capitalizing anything. But I have a delightful clip. There's an introduction, a very brief introduction by Garrison Keillor that will tell us a little bit about her, and then she'll read the poem. So Keisha, can we take a look at that?
Yes, pulling it up right now, just 1 second.
Of course, thank you.
Hold on.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Keisha. Tanya, I like your kitchen.
Said that. Thank you.
So
We just got back from the grocery store, so everything is all over.
Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I
I'm gonna
can.
go ahead and play it. Can you hear it?
Lucille Clifton grew up in Western New York
Yes.
near Buffalo, worked as a government clerk and office assistant.
Oh, it just froze up a little.
Oh, yeah, it froze a bit. Hmm.
And now we can't hear it, Keisha.
Huh.
This happens in my classes all the time when I try to share screen. It starts and then we can't hear it, but maybe we can reboot it.
Huh. Why isn't it playing? Yeah, we still can't
Yeah,
hear
we
it.
can't hear it.
All right, sorry about that. Hold on. Let me stop sharing here. 1 second.
It looks like a nice day there, Marcia. I see you're outside, out back.
Yes, it's
Garden,
very
right?
nice, but it's a little loud occasionally.
Yeah.
Nicer day than yesterday, at least in these
Oh
parts.
my goodness. Yes.
I'm in Seattle right now. And
What?
yesterday, yeah, visiting a friend. And yesterday was gorgeous. Today is good too. It was supposed to rain, but
Mhm.
so I'm enjoying being
folks.
different.
Let's see if I can do this now. Let's see here.
Okay.
Share sound, yes. Oh, I have to download the file.
Gosh, it's making you download it.
Wow.
Maybe we should we just read it ourselves?
Let's give it a second. It's short if we can pull it up.
Try it again.
oh,
Yeah. Let's
yeah.
see. I'm going to start over.
Great.
Let's see. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear it.
Okay.
Lucille Clifton grew up in Western New York near Buffalo, worked as a government clerk and office assistant. Her first book, Good Times, was read.
Oh, now it cut out again.
Jesus, it
But
froze.
One should wish to celebrate
Oh, there it goes.
and wish to be celebrated.
Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed.
Nice.
That is a wonder. I have used that short poem as an epigraph for my poetry syllabi for a couple of semesters now. And I think when Lucille Clifton wrote it, it was, really very timely. And in the last few years, it's become even more timely. But it also expands outward from a Black woman's point of view to the fact that it's not just about survival, but it's about a celebration of more than survival. Something has tried to kill me and has failed, but the fact that she has shaped this life for herself. So, Keisha, could we put the words back up for a moment? This is one I'm sorry to say I don't have memorized. I should have it memorized.
Yes, hold on 1 second.
Yeah.
Want to get it up right there. Share. Where are we? There you go.
Right, right. And again, this is, I think, kind of going back to that Whitmanian model about I celebrate myself. And this is really, really no mention of God. There's really no mention of the spirit, but there is, I think, a spiritual dimension in the human imagination to create oneself virtually using no raw material. What I have shaped into a kind of life, that's what we're celebrating. I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be, what did I see to be except myself? And I love that line, the way it just hangs there. I made it up. I made it up. And then she uses these two really cool phrases here, which I think they're very easy to gloss over unless we really hear them. Here on this bridge between starshine and clay. And I'll tell my students sometimes that it seems as though in that one phrase between starshine and clay, she is giving a nod to the Big Bang and the creation of the universe and all the periodic elements we've all heard before, right? Quite literally, that you are made of stardust. Like that is not just, that is not the words of some romantic poem, that you are actually made of stardust. That's the raw material with which our atoms are formed. And clay, which to me alludes to the Bible story, the Genesis story of God forming, creates the entire universe with what words? So for most of creation, God's a poet, but when it comes to forming humanity, he fashions it from the clay. And I am quite sure that Lucille Clifton had both things in mind when she brings those images together. This bridge between starshine and clay. No one hand, by one hand holding tight the other hand. And that too, powerful image where it's not as though someone else was holding my hand and pulling me along, but that I had to have my one hand with my other hand holding tight together as though she is, again, shaping herself into her own life. And then comes back to where she began. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. And that's a celebration indeed. When one works that hard to shape yourself into some kind of life, it's glorious. It's absolutely glorious. And I think the important thing about hearing her read it is that when we read this on the page in our heads, the tendency is it sounds like a little bit of a downer at the end. Wow, something tried to kill her and has failed, and that's what we're celebrating. But when you see Lucille read it from the podium and how happy and how joyous she is, and it is a celebration, her face lights up, has failed. I've triumphed through the day, one day at a time. What are your thoughts about this poem before we move to the next two? Now, there's only a couple more left, and we will get there.
I love how there's no like external creator. It's her, it's all down to her. I mean, that's, what you were talking about. I just love that. I have shaped into a kind of life, and the hands holding each other. It's really, and I just love that ending.
I feel it's triumphant. It's really triumphant and so strong.
Definitely.
Yes. Yeah, it really is a celebration. It really is a celebration. And as we sometimes find with Lucille Clifton's poetry, which can be sometimes very confessional, and sometimes are a little unnerving, and sometimes the details from her youth, they can shake us out of our comfort zone. She always has these marvelous ways, almost catch us by surprise, of where she finally lands even a short verse like this. So now for something completely different still, we had a lot of completely different today. Joy Harjo, has been, or she's not anymore, I don't believe, but she had an unprecedented third term as the United States Poet Laureate. She's indigenous, and there's a whole, the Musgrave Tuskegee tribe is her part of her history. I've used her a great deal on the Poetry Foundation. And I love how this taps into a tradition before our continent, meaning, you know, the Western hemisphere, North and South, ever experienced anything such as the Judeo-Christian tradition. These ideas run for thousands of years, and they run so deep. So again, it's a little bit on the longer side, but it reads both as a poem and as a story and as a narrative, which also makes me think of the orality of the native traditions and how their stories were handed down and how so many of them were turned into verse, especially by Joy, who was so masterful at it. So Keisha, if we can call that clip up, we can hear Joy read it beautifully, and then we'll chat a little bit about it when she's done.
I'm Joy Harjo, and this is A Map to the Next World. In the last days of the fourth world, I wish to make a map for those who would climb through the hole in the sky. My only tools were the desires of humans as they emerged from the killing fields, from the bedrooms and the kitchens. For the soul is a wanderer with many hands and feet. The map must be made of sand and can't be read by ordinary light. It must carry fire to the next tribal town for renewal of spirit. In the legend are instructions on the language of the land and how it was we forgot to acknowledge the gift as if we were not it or of it. Take note of the proliferation of supermarkets and malls, the altars of money. They best describe the detour from grace. Keep track of the errors of our forgetfulness. The fog steals our children while we sleep. Flowers of rage spring up in the depression. Monsters are born there of nuclear anger. Trees of ashes wave goodbye to goodbye, and the map appears to disappear. We no longer know the names of the birds here or how to speak to them by their personal names. Once we knew everything in this lush promise. What I am telling you is real and is printed in a warning on the map. Our forgetfulness stalks us, walks the earth beside us, leaving a trail of paper diapers, needles, and wasted blood. An imperfect map will have to do, little one. The place of entry is the sea of your mother's blood, your father's small death as he longs to know himself in another. There is no exit. The map can be interpreted through the wall of the intestine, a spiral on the road of knowledge. You will travel through the membrane of death, smell cooking from the encampment where our relatives make a feast of fresh deer meat and corn soup in the Milky Way. They have never left us. We abandon them for science. And when you take your next breath, as we enter the fifth world, there will be no X, no guidebook with words you can carry. You will have to navigate by your mother's voice, renew the song she is singing. Fresh courage glimmers from planets and lights the map printed with the blood of history, a map you will have to know by your intention, by the language of suns. When you emerge, note the tracks of the monster slayers, where they entered the cities of artificial light and killed what was killing us. You will see red cliffs. They are the heart, contain the ladder. A white deer will come to greet you when the last human climbs from the destruction. We were never perfect, yet the journey we make together is perfect on this earth, who was once a star and made the same mistakes as humans. We might make them again, she said. Crucial to finding the way is this. There is no beginning or end, and you must make your own map.
Wow, I love that poem. I love that poem. I love the journey of the poem. What are your thoughts?
I thought it was so wonderful to hear her reciting that.
Yeah.
It made it twice as real,
Mhm.
because it was almost a rhythm. It was almost
Yeah.
music.
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's few things that compare to not just hearing a poem aloud, but hearing the author, the poet, read it aloud, because they're embodying what they were conveying with words. Yeah.
I appreciate the part where she talks about we have forgotten, and the image of the diapers and the needles, like,
Yeah.
and I just appreciate her perspective, being Native American, of like the false cities, even the artificial cities, and all that. I mean, it's very powerful.
Yes, yes. The importance of protecting our environment and caring for the earth has been a through line through all of Joy's work, however philosophical or in some cases political or gender oriented. She really does see the earth as a home. And so much of her titles of her poetry speak to this. There's one poem in particular, I'm going to probably not get the name completely perfect, but it's something about don't disturb the earth spirit, or something about how the earth spirit is writing her next chapter. And I also noticed that there's something, another affinity between what Lucille was saying about creating herself, right? I had no model. And almost like the very end of this poem, where she says, it's almost like, oh, and here's a big hint. You have to make your own map. It's up to you. No one's going to make the map for you. And it's not just going to be handed down. As much as these traditions are discussed, and that's why they call them traditions, we all have to in some ways figure it out for ourselves. So in our last few minutes, I'd like to take a look at, now how about something funny? How about something a little humorous to bring us home? We have one quick one at the very end, but I love Billy Collins. Billy Collins will always make us laugh. Billy Collins is what I sometimes call as the proverbial
Oh, I love this.
vortex poet, where he starts off, he doesn't really do it here so much. What he does, I guess, in some ways, start with something very specific that we've all heard before. How many angels can dance on the head of a pin? Takes that simple idea, and then he expands it outward. So would someone like to read the entire poem for us, please? It's not that long. And you can see how it sort of starts to widen as he goes along with this idea. We couldn't have a program on the American poetry and the spirit without some mention of angels.
Gosh.
I'll read it.
Thank you, Marcia,
Marcia.
I'm sorry, Marcia.
It's okay. Questions
Names are
about
so
angels.
small here. Yeah.
Questions about angels. Of all the questions you might want to ask about angels, the only one you ever hear is how many can dance on the head of a pin. No curiosity about how they pass the eternal time besides circling the throne, chanting in Latin, or delivering a crust of bread to a hermit on earth, or guiding a boy and girl across a rickety wooden bridge. Do they fly through God's body and come out singing? Do they swing like children from the hinges of the spirit world, saying their names backwards and forwards? Do they sit alone in little gardens, changing colors? What about their sleeping habits, the fabric of their robes, their diet of unfiltered divine light? What goes on inside their luminous heads? Is there a wall these tall presences can look over and see hell? If an angel fell off a cloud, would he leave a hole in a river? And would the hole float along endlessly, filled with the silent letters of every angelic word? If an angel delivered the mail, would he arrive in a blinding rush of wings, or would he just assume the appearance of the regular mailman and whistle up the driveway reading the postcards? No, the medieval theologians control the court. The only question you ever hear is about the little dance floor on the head of a pin, where halos are meant to converge and drift invisibly. It is designed to make us think in millions, billions, to make us run out of numbers and collapse into infinity. But perhaps the answer is simple one. One female angel dancing alone in her stocking feet, a small jazz combo working in the background. She sways like a branch in the wind, her beautiful eyes closed, and the tall, thin bassist leans over to glance at his watch because she has been dancing forever. And now it is very late, even for the musicians.
It's great.
Great ending. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I don't even know what to say about it other than it delights us. It delights us, and to take such a simple idea. I love the phrase, the dance floor of the pen, and how it comes back to something. This one angel dancing to a jazz combo, but the angel, of course, can dance forever, but the musician's thinking, hey, we got to close up, buddy. But Billy will do that. I would invite you. It's not a gloomy poem, to check out a poem by Billy called "The Dead," and it's about how the dead look down upon us from the heavens. And it also is in the same vein as this poem, which can be very delightful. So we have one more. So I've just put that out there as again, something about angels that is really funny and kind of intersecting, the old theological ideas that maybe we've heard since children from different traditions. And Billy just throws it all up in the air and has fun with it, as he is apt to do. So one more, and I'd like to share it with you, is something that came my way via a kind of conference retreat I did many years ago. It had been attributed at one time to a South American Jesuit, Father Pedro Arrupe, but it turns out that we've discovered that Father Arrupe used to recite this little prayer or poem an awful lot, but it was really by a fellow Jesuit named Joseph Whelan. And I love it because as someone who went to a Jesuit college, this to me is really everything about Jesuit theology, because the word God disappears from the text after the second line. And then it becomes about something that we all talk about, God, if God is anything, God is love. But I always like to read this at the end of any semester, but especially at the end of these long semesters lately with everything else going on, as a little bit of closing wisdom for students about, if you have one big takeaway from a poetry class, it might be this. So I'll ask you, I will take just like to read it, and then you can listen and take this home with you and maybe read one or any of these to a friend. So Father Joseph writes, in fact, nothing is more practical than finding God, than falling in love in a quite absolute final way. What you are in love with, what seizes your imagination, will affect everything. It will decide what will get you out of bed in the morning, what you will do with your evenings, how you will spend your weekends, what you read, whom you know, what breaks your heart, and what amazes you with joy and gratitude. Fall in love, stay in love, and it will decide everything.
Ed is there. Beautiful.
Yes. Yeah, that's a pretty cool way to close that wonderful
Definitely.
Advice.
It
Fall
really
in love,
is.
stay in love. I'm
Great.
sorry,
Yeah.
Laura, go ahead. Yeah.
And it can apply to so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so practical. I mean, again, kind of in the Jesuit vein, there's so much practicality here, because indeed, when we fall in love, and sometimes we don't always fall in love with good things, but we fall in love with good things, when we fall in love with people, our families, our significant others, it does make all these decisions for us. It is the greatest of all motivators.
Yes.
So We're running close to the end. I just want to say this has been a wonderful, wonderful pleasure for me. And I think most everyone here knows how to reach me if you'd like to. Or you can reach me through Laura or anybody at the South Orange Public Library. If there are any other questions coming up. And any just final comments before we call it? I always like to linger around, and it's one of those days that doesn't really leave us the opportunity for that. But any other just final thoughts?
Could I say something? My friend Karen, who is also here, she and I are always looking for things that you could put on a t-shirt. And today there was so many things that could be printed on a t-shirt, like you must make your own map. And
Yes.
Yeah.
I am a bridge between starshine and clay. And who can be more wonderful than myself? Start a business.
That is beyond delightful.
I think so. I think you've got a great business.
Yeah. Or fall in love, stay in love. It will decide everything.
Yes.
Because my goodness, it will.
That's wonderful.
That's awesome. Thanks, Tanya.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, John.
Thank you so much,
you.
John.
Thank you,
This has
John.
been wonderful. Just so enlightening and wonderful to spend time with you and with those beautiful verses today. And thank you to Keisha Miller, my colleague, for making this run so smoothly. And thank you all for coming. I just wanted to say that our next program is Friday, April 22nd at 1 p.m. And we plan to be in person for the first time. In the library, in the meeting room with Tanisha Malcolm, who is the director of the Cities program at the Nature Conservancy NJ. And she's going to be speaking on Earth Day, which I did not plan, but it happened, about centering nature in cities. And so I hope you'll join us for the Earth Day adjacent program. And thank you all so much again.
Thank you.
Will it be on Zoom as well?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, it will also be on Zoom, so you can join remotely.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful National Poetry Month and whatever holiday you're celebrating. Laura, thank you. Keisha, Laura, and you and I will be in touch.
Yes, definitely. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.